presentations. Great presentations, everybody. Jason Grebley from the Kirby Institute here at UNSW. My question's for Paul. On and off. The situation in Afghanistan is incredibly concerning, and what you sort of presented in terms of potential for moving outwards to Europe. I'm just sort of curious on what sort of the thoughts are around potential beyond sort of what you sort of discussed in terms of early warning systems. I saw a presentation from somebody from Switzerland from the drug checking unit there, and I'm also just sort of curious as your thoughts on sort of integrated drug checking sort of centers as an early warning system for some of these new sort of fentanyl and fentanyl analogs coming through. And are you concerned yet around the situation in Europe and what's to come next year?
It's not a good day for technology and me today. Yeah, no, I think we are. I mean, it's a bit strange because one of the first things you have to start saying is we're quite concerned that there might be less heroin and methamphetamine that's being produced in Afghanistan around in the future, which sounds like a strange thing to say, but in some way at least, I think high heroin availability in terms of price and purity in Europe has been a protective factor to the emergence of some of the synthetic opioids. So we don't have a growing opiate market. We've had high availability, so you haven't really had a lot of space for some of these new drugs to come in. And when they come in, one of the reasons why we see such low levels of harm associated availability, even though we know we've had fentanyls around for 20 years, we know that we've had production in the past, we know that we've had availability. So I think we are concerned if things change, and at least now to be thinking about what is it that we need to do now, both in terms of service provision and in terms of monitoring, to be more sensitive to those changes. So some of the things we're doing is trying to look at more monitoring within Afghanistan, and there's also UN projects doing that, so looking at some of the satellite stuff, but they're also doing interviews with producers in the country, and they're also looking at things like there was a new legal framework brought in about 2 weeks ago. So at first the suspicion is that this could be price manipulation. There's a lot of, it's Afghanistan, so the information sources are always going to be weak. But it does seem that at the moment that the ban is proving sticky. So the information available at the moment is that even despite the fact this is going to impact a lot on poverty in Afghanistan, lots of incomes kept in the form of opium, a lot of rural population involved in poppy production. So one thing that you're going to see some disruption in the country, and what's the implications of that, and some of the things like population flows are another concern related to that. So what can we do on the routes from Afghanistan? And then I think two things. One is, what should we be doing in terms of our conventional heroin-using population, so increasing treatment, things like that, what's the opportunities? And then a concern about these new opioids. And I think there's two concerns. One is the sort of the immediate impact of that in terms of what happens in the next year, essentially. We expect 18 months, sort of, we know how long it takes for poppy grown in Afghanistan to get to the European market. So we just start seeing those next year. But the question is, what's happening 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line if we actually potentiate a market for synthetic opioids, then we see new forms of those, and maybe then that comes into a new population, and it could be that 5 years from now we're looking at actually synthetic opiate problems as amongst young populations and the new problem. That would be the big public health concern, or equally big public health concern. So the thing, it's really the wake-up call for us is that we really need to improve our monitoring outside the normal populations that we usually look at. And we're seeing a little bit of that, some of at least signals of that already in some of the nitrazine deaths, where some of them are kind of in the population marginalised groups you did imagine, and some of them aren't. And so I think really it's thinking a little bit about what these implications could be, and what do we do now in terms of to be faster reaction if we do see those problems. It could be that in 6 months from now, due to the internal pressures in Afghanistan, everything changes. But I think the long-term move is towards synthetics and away from drugs that have to be grown in large outside spaces and then cross multiple borders. I think there is a market logic towards synthetics as we go forward. In terms of the drug testing services, we're working with trying to a surveillance model with drug checking services in Europe and using them to pick up on some of these new substances. But some of the challenges there is actually they're quite difficult to detect if you don't know what you're looking for. So again, it's about this idea of actually sharing information and then being more proactive in saying, okay, this is what we're concerned about. Are you seeing it? So again, I think it's about developing multi-sources and then linking them over time.
I'm getting some messages about the sound coming through on Microsoft Teams during the panel discussion. Is there anything we can do about that for colleagues who are online? Anyway, I'll leave that with the people who know how to do it. Are there other questions from the floor for panel members? There's one down here, Lise, or else we've got... Yeah.
Hello. Oh, just has to be very close. Amy, I was just wondering, I work clinically as well, and I'm not sure if this is in any of the minimum unit pricing research, but I feel like I'm seeing more non-beverage alcohol drinkers since kind of inflation has started creeping up and some alcohol-based hand rubs sneaking in to people drinking as well. And I was wondering if there was any evidence around minimum unit pricing having people swapping over towards the non-beverage alcohol.
Such a good question. So we have the data on the zero alcohol beverages, but we haven't analysed it yet. So that is a goal for us in terms of being able to look at the size of the market around the zero alcohol beverages and how they're being priced relative to their alcoholic equivalents. In terms of work around zero alcohol beverages, there are other people in the audience who are much better positioned than me to talk around uptake of them among young people. So in terms of that, I think it's really an emerging field in terms of understanding. We definitely have concerns, and there's a number of projects going on across Australia to try and understand that. So maybe I can link you up with the faces that I can see in the audience after this one. Oh, non-beverage, was it? Sorry, I didn't hear the first bit. Oh, I just jumped to the bit that I wanted to hear. Sorry. Non-beverage. No, I don't know the answer to that. Does anyone else want the microphone in the room? Oh, there's shaking of heads. I'm assuming that's a no, we don't know, as opposed to a no, I don't want to answer. No, we don't have good systems. PhD, anyone? I don't know.
There's another colleague, I think, in the left with the mic.
Hi, it's Kendall here from NDARC. Thanks all for great presentations. Amy, another question for you, just around the need to scrape all this data from the internet versus accessing pricing data from the companies. Is there, a future where the government can request that information and or how can that be required? Is that in our future, or do you really have to do this ongoing forever?
It's a great question, and I think it's one that's an ongoing one in the alcohol space. You would think for a product that is so commonly consumed among our population that we would have good data around pricing and in turn around sales. So it's not just in the pricing space. In terms of understanding consumption and sale of alcohol, we're really quite challenged in that space as well. So I hope for the future, and maybe that's a call to say this, given that we're seeing in particular those rising harms and those rising deaths, there needs to be more done so that we can monitor and evaluate the impact of changes.
We've got time for one or two more questions. I can't see any online, but in the room. Michael.
Amy, thanks. Well, thanks everybody for your presentation. But Amy, I just want you to tell us what your advice to government would be on minimum unit pricing.
Michael, you're my boss. You can't do that to me. So sorry, my advice to government on minimum unit pricing. I mean, I think looking at the evidence from Scotland and looking at the evidence from NT, it sounds like there's a growing evidence base. There still seems to remain some questions. And I'd really point, if anyone's interested, to the work of people like Nick Taylor, who are doing fantastic work in this space. So there seems to be some questions around which populations it may impact, in particular, I think, around moderate drinkers. But for the most part, it seems to be pointing towards reduced harms, and not seeing a huge shift in terms of people turning to other alcohol, in terms of some questions around a shift to spirits among those higher risk drinkers, but it doesn't seem to be a huge evidence towards that as far as I'm aware. So I think the picture is positive in terms of the impact of minimum unit price. Am I allowed to pause there, or do you want me to? Yeah, great.
One more question down the back. Yeah. Getting Lisa's steps up.
Hello, thank you very much. We're looking at cause and effect, and we're looking at price marketing as a means of understanding and perhaps controlling. How about the other end? Are there any studies in place to look at what historical, such as trauma, what sort of mental health issues go towards alcohol habits? That area.
Yes. So the question was around the broader context of alcohol use. 100%. I think I almost felt a little bit uncomfortable with that first slide, because obviously the first slide is talking about best buys and most cost-effective approaches. And that is true in terms of alcohol control, but alcohol is so complex. They are strategies that help in terms of reducing, I guess, the availability of alcohol and some of those harmful effects. But just like Paul has been talking about earlier this morning, it's not a straightforward problem. It is incredibly complex. There are so many factors that are interrelated in terms of increasing the risk of alcohol harm and the reasons why alcohol may be used. And I think it is sometimes somewhat simplistic to focus on these things. We know they are good levers, good tools in terms of potentially reducing population level harms, but without access to treatment, without thinking about the broader context, we need to be thinking more broadly, 100%.
You finish the questions there, but thank you so much, you guys, for those wide-ranging presentations. One of the reflections I make is that, a lot of the time we worry that nothing changes and that we don't make any progress, and these colleagues are a demonstration that things do change. I look back over the last 20 years and the availability and the quality of data and evidence has improved exponentially, and as a result, our capacity, if we choose to use it, to better design, target and implement harm reduction policies has likewise improved. So I'd like you to join with me in thanking these colleagues and the colleagues who stand behind them for the dedicated, high quality work that they do in the public interest. Thank you.